Again, good morning. So we were looking at the concept of Bechira from a, I think, psychological, philosophical, and theological perspective. And last week we looked at it from a psychological perspective, at the psychological limitations of free will. In other words, is it not true that we are in some level or other influenced by our family and our nature, our circumstances, our upbringing, our psychological capacity? And we saw the thoughts of Rav who strangely really is the first thinker I know of who sort of deals with this in a systematic manner. Other thinkers seem to have held similar ideas, but he's the first one that sort of lays this out. And he says, despite the fact that our commitment to Bechira is very, very fundamental, many of the Rishonim that address the topic of free will point out that without it, everything else in the Torah seems to fall apart. The whole concept of expectations of human behavior, wrongs and right, instructions, demands, rewards and punishments, nothing seems to make sense without the concept of Bechira, without the concept of free will. And as I said, to the best of my knowledge, there's maybe two classic thinkers in the whole of our philosophical system who question free will. Nonetheless, that doesn't mean that we are committed to the idea of complete free will. All it means to say is that we have aspects of free will in our lives. It doesn't mean that everything that we do is completely free. And this is Rav metaphor of the Nukudat HaBechira, the narrow bands of free will. Not that everything is possible. That was Rav thinking. And then I mentioned that there are some reasons to think, based on the Rambam and Shmona Prakim and elsewhere, that maybe the Rambam disagreed with this. Maybe the Rambam thought that all of us have a free range, a complete free range of free will. Maybe it would take an extraordinary heroism or an extraordinary villainy to do something truly awful or truly staggeringly great. But under the right circumstances, there's within the capacity of all of us to do even things that are shockingly beyond what we might have thought was within our psychological capacity. So it would appear from the writings of the Rambam. The truth is, these matters are very hard to determine, either psychologically or philosophically. In this area of debate, who's right and so on. But this is the sort of summary of the classic position with reference to the range of free will. What I want to look at today is the philosophical problems of free will. And again, so often one talks about free will, and we will do this. It's formulated in a Jewish sense in the classic sort of Yedia and Bechira. If Hashem knows everything, how can we have free will? There's so much more to say on the matter from a philosophical point of view, even before we come on to the uniquely theological or Jewish concerns with it. And there is a very profound philosophical problem with free will. And what I'm going to say now is I think one of the most subtle and nuanced philosophical points one can make, even though I warn you, it can be heard as a little bit of a philosophical cop-out. I don't think it is. I think it's philosophically sound. So there is a problem with free will, which is that it's a fundamental and basic concept. It's fundamental to Judaism, as I said, but it also seems fundamental to our ability to function in the world, and yet it isn't definable. There's a major definition problem going on over here, and all I'm going to argue basically is that this is in many areas of philosophy we have this problem, and just because we can't define something doesn't mean we should throw it out. Consciousness is a classic example of this. There's so many things like love and various other things which seem important to us human beings, and nonetheless are very difficult to pin down. And a lot of philosophy can really be summarized as, interesting, even philosophy itself is quite hard to define. What is philosophy? One of the best definitions of philosophy is that it's what philosophers do. People, after much thought, there's not really a better answer found to that question. And there's all sorts of things that are quite hard to pin down and define, and yet nonetheless exist. So, what I'd like to try and explain is when we can't define something, should it ring an alarm bell that what's going on maybe is nonsense, and when should it be simply a spur to, okay, we need to think more carefully about this, but we're not going to throw out the concept. So the core challenge with philosophy, with free will and philosophy, core challenge with the concept of free will is that there seems to be two models to explain decision making, neither of which satisfy free will. And we need to ask ourselves the question, when I make decision X, so I have a choice between Y and X, and I choose X, is there a reason why I've chosen X? Now, there seems to be two answers to that question, or more profoundly, is there a cause behind me choosing X? Is there, when I say reason, I don't just mean a sort of explanation, but I mean in the scientific sense, is there a cause? Is there a causal chain that caused me to choose X? Now, there seems to be one of two possible answers to that question, either yes or no. That should cover, or I don't know, but obviously, but in principle, it's either yes or no. So if the answer is that there's something that caused me to choose X over Y, in that case, I didn't make a free-willed decision because there's something that caused me to do it. If the answer is no, there's no cause for me choosing X over Y, then that's what we call randomness. If there's no cause, it's just something, X was just chosen for no reason, no preceding reason, then it's random. There was no cause for this, so it's a random choice. Neither definition seems to fit the category of what we think of free will, because if it was caused by something, then that's not free. And if it wasn't caused by anything, then it was random. It also wasn't a freely chosen choice. It wasn't a free choice. It wasn't my choice. Now, this question is subtle, so I just want to give us a few moments to pause to think about this. It's a very, very important question, and it's one of the, there's sort of several questions which are the real building blocks of philosophy, and this is one of those. For those that take the concept of free will seriously, what on earth, what do we actually mean by free will? In a sense, the paradox is in the very word free. If it's not free, then it's not free will, and if it is free, completely free, then it's seemingly random. Now, the temptation is to answer yes.
Schematic your model by saying that if it's randomness, it's not free will, because at the end of the day, random means that you've got a series of events. The probability of the event of any one of the 100 events happening is exactly the same. You haven't got a way of predicting what it is. But in the context of free will, if we think of it in the individual, you can't quite say that. On one hand, if it's yes, then he doesn't have free will. If it's no, it's a random event. Because amongst those random events, the object, i.e. you, is actually choosing from those 100 events.
So there is a temptation to answer this question by saying there is a cause of the choice, and the cause is me. But the question again is, what causes me to make this choice? Where is the causal chain in this choice making? If there's something that causes me to make the choice, then that's a cause outside myself. Maybe someone's holding a gun to my head, maybe psychologically, there's a cause, my upbringing, my nurture, my genes, but there's something beyond what we consider to be the core of myself to be making this choice. And in which case, this isn't free will. And if there is nothing causing me to make this choice, then on what basis am I making this choice? And therefore, in what sense is it anything other than random? And can I be held culpable? So in answer to your question, I mean, if we are happy to define free will as random, then you're correct. There's no problem over here. But if we understand free will to be something that I'm choosing, and that there's a responsibility that I have for the choice, because I have ownership of this choice in some shape or form, what do we mean when I say I am choosing to option Y, option X over option Y?
The very fact that free will doesn't fit in the category of cause or random,
yes,
makes me feel that that's not the perfect way to approach the question. It doesn't fit me like it's a proper question. I don't think random is the only alternative.
So in a sense, you're right. What this question is going to bring out is that there's two deeper philosophical problems really underlying errors in this question, which is we don't understand when I say I make a choice or you make a choice, that the person themselves makes a choice, the free agent makes a choice. We don't know how to define free agency. And thank God for the last couple of 100 years, we've understood also something that wasn't understood before David Hume, that we don't understand cause and effect either. So there are two major blunders, in a sense, in the question. which is the reason this question remains such a powerful paradox is because there are two terms which are poorly understood philosophically, and that's really the root of the problem. And therefore, unless you're willing to throw out all human, even if you're tempted to say, you know what, this is a really serious philosophical question, let's throw out free will, you're also going to have to throw out the concept of an agent, of what the I is, the consciousness, and or throughout the concept of cause and effect, because in truth that's what's underlying the question. But again, I want to move on to that in a few minutes. I just want us to go in the simple understanding that we live in a Newtonian universe, in which everything has a cause that precedes it. In that model, surely there must be a cause that causes me to make this choice. If so, that's not free will. So that's option number one. Option number two is, well, let's introduce an element of randomness. Maybe we'll throw in half-understood concepts of quantum mechanics. We know we don't quite live in a Newtonian universe. Maybe there really is. Maybe belief in free will, in essence, and it does, is already a rejection of the concept of a Newtonian universe, in which case I can genuinely choose things. Well, what's causing me to make that choice? If there's no cause of me making that choice, then it's random. If there is a cause of me making that choice, then it seems to be caused, in which case it isn't free. I want to point out the concept of free will, in essence, does defy a Newtonian universe. Let's just define what we mean by a Newtonian universe. A universe that was believed in, by the way, till 100 years ago, in which everything works like clockwork. It's all a complicated piece of machinery. But in principle, if I had the crunching power, the calculating power, and I had the knowledge of all the relevant information, if I know the current state of every bit of the universe, every part of the universe, I can predict exactly how it will be in 60 seconds time, exactly how it will be in 5 minutes time, in 5 years time, or 5 millennia, or 5 billion years. It doesn't make a difference, because the whole universe works through this wonderful system of mathematics, which was first revealed to us by Newton and then carried on. But basically, if we understand, if we live in a scientific universe, and by the way, most of us still think this is the universe we live in. Right? If we live in a scientific universe where there's rules of science that explain everything that takes place, then in theory, everything is predictable. If I know what everything is, I can predict all the rules of science that will affect it. Now, many people who aren't scientists or aren't philosophers, who subscribe to scientific worldview, still adopt this stance. Judaism has always claimed that this stance is incorrect, because we believe there are two forces of innovation which make the universe not entirely predictable, two things that can bring a newness to the universe, to a genuine change, something that was unpredictable. The first is the creative power of God, and the second is the creative power of human beings. That's what we mean when the Kabbalists say that B'Tselem Elokim, that we are created in the image of God. In the view of the Kabbalah, means that we have the power of Bechira. It means we have a genuine creative ability. There's something we can bring that's new to the system. You can predict every particle in the universe that's just an atom or a molecule or a photon or some energy, but you can't predict the human innovation, the decisions that humans will make into this. So for more or less a couple of thousand years, certainly a couple of hundred years from the time of Newton, and really a couple of thousand years, because the sort of inherent logic behind this was found already in the Greeks when they struggled over ideas around fate and the like. The Jewish position that there's innovation, newness possible in creation in the world, what was countercultural, counter the scientific convention. We now, as far as we currently understand science, that post two revolutions, really, both of which Einstein was famously involved in, and the first most significantly, the implication of an expanding universe, which started on a point of time and space, and secondly, the quantum mechanics revolution. Both of them tell us that we indeed live in a universe in which there is newness. It's not completely predictable. There is change that can occur. That's all very fascinating and interesting. And by the way, I'm not saying, oh, let's pat ourselves on the back because it turns out we were right all along, because science can change its view again. Jews have stuck by this view, irrespective of whether current scientific understanding agrees with it or not. It happens to be that we're living in a fortunate age to buy into Jewish beliefs, in the sense that the major sort of philosophical and scientific questions around the essence of what it means to be a human being are emerging on our side as of now. But the problem is that this element of newness that we're talking about, at least in the context of human free will, nonetheless doesn't seem to be philosophically coherent. We can't define it, because if genuinely it's something new, something that wasn't predictable, It means it wasn't inherent. Just because I knew the situation now doesn't mean there's anything in it that causes the next decision. If there's nothing in the current situation that causes the next decision, then we would define that as uncaused. So it would be random. It wouldn't be something that was caused previously. Again, I appreciate this is subtle, and there's a very strong and powerful voice inside all of us that's screaming out, no, I'm choosing. So I just want to force us all I want to push you against the wall, like grab you by the throat and push you against the wall, and force you just to think about this point, which is, if I make a decision at t+1 in a second's time, right? So I'm going to make a decision in a second's time. In the seconds preceding it, is there anything in that current situation that can fully explain and fully cause my next choice? And this is the bind. If there is something that can fully cause my next choice, then it's not free. And if there isn't something that can fully the cause of my next choice, then it means that this was uncaused by anything preceding it. If it was uncaused by anything preceding it, then that's not me choosing, it's just randomness. It was uncaused by anything that preceded it. So in the moment before my free choice, if I'm looking at time t and I know that t+1 I'm going to make a choice, was there anything in it that caused it previously? If nothing, then it seems random, it seems inexplicable. I can't talk about a causal chain and effect. And if there is something, then it's not a free choice. So that's the problem that's facing us, yes.
Why is it binary?
I'm choosing to make it binary, meaning if there's a partial cause, then we're still evading the issue, which is, so the bit that isn't explained. But zoom in on the problem is the bit that isn't explained. Again, we have the same paradox. Either it's caused, in which case it's not free, or it's not uncaused, in which case it's random. We always get to wherever you want to locate the bit where free will comes in. At that point, I want to hold you against the wall, right? And I want to say, is it caused or is it uncaused? If it's caused, it's not free. If it's uncaused, then it's just random. I'm not trying to convince anyone here to be a kofar. So I would beg everyone, if you're struggling to understand the question, please don't be dismissive of my answer if you struggle to understand the answer also. But
by your definition, you have to have no reason whatsoever for doing what you're going to do next. It seems to be your definition.
Even if there's some reason, this is Shimon's question, even if there's some reason for choosing it, it still ducks the core question, which is whichever part there isn't sufficient reason for choosing it, that component, that part, what's making that be chosen? If there's a cause and a reason for choosing it, then it's not free. And if there's no reason for choosing it, then it's random.
The corollary of what you're saying then is there is no such thing as free will. I mean, that's what's in a nutshell.
The question is that we have a very profound problem philosophically with the concept of free will, because even though it seems very fundamental, when we try and define it, it falls apart. The definition falls apart. If you want to phrase it as a question and answer, the question would be, therefore, does this mean that there's no such thing as free will? In which case, philosophically, we know that the most basic and fundamental claim of Judaism is untrue. And the answer is going to be, no, there's many things in philosophy where there's definitional problems and we don't throw them out. And I'll just try and spend a few minutes speaking about how we deal with that sort of family of definitional problems.
You're looking at how it's called a binary system, yes or no?
Yes.
Is there an alternative? I mean, I'm not trying, difficult, just sitting here thinking at the minute.
I'm not expecting anyone around this table to resolve a problem that's been bothering people for thousands of years. Yeah.
Binary situation. As far as free will, is there any possible?
Okay, there's a lot of ink that's been spilt on this problem, with numerous attempts of answers. My personal, again, maybe I'll just be honest about what's controversial, what's not controversial in this discussion. What's not controversial is that there's a real issue here that needs to be grappled with. What is controversial are the answers to this problem. My personal take on the matter, is I don't find any of the answers convincing. My personal take on the matter is that this is part of a family of philosophical problems, of things that can't be defined, and we shouldn't panic about it at all, because what's really going on here is not an issue around free will. It's a much more basic issue around cause and effect, which we have no idea what really that means, and we don't really know what consciousness means, and there's a bunch of things that, to throw out free will because of this concept. A scientist who says, look, I'm very rational and philosophical, free will must be an illusion because we've demonstrated, philosophically it doesn't make sense, for the same reason should actually throw out the whole endeavor of science. Because as Hume pointed out, there's really the same problems around all cause and effect paradoxes and everything else. So that, to my mind, there's very good reasons why we don't know how to answer that question. But there are attempts to. There's numerous variants of attempts to get out of this philosophical trap. Yeah.
Is the Rob going to touch on Alma Discussia and Alma Escalia?
I'm definitely not going to touch on those terms. I will mention. I will mention why there may be a theological answer to this question, which I don't think is different to the philosophical answer. So, I think the language of the mystics in Kabbalah is one way of answering this question. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone at least somewhat hear where this question is coming from?
It's difficult to understand why randomness is, contradictory to free will, because in a sense you could argue that's the essence. If you whatever happens.
Okay, so randomness is in a sense free will. It's the most free thing possible because anything can happen. The problem is it's definitely not what we mean by free will, because what we mean by free will is a choice I'm making. If I'm making a choice, then you can phrase the question, by the way, almost psychologically if you want. You can say, let's ask why am I making this choice? If there's a reason I'm making this choice, then there's a reason I'm making this choice, in which case it's not free will, there's a reason that I'm making this choice. And there's no reason I'm making this choice, then what basis am I making the choice? So you can phrase the question on numerous levels, but it all gets back down to the same thing, that we're not satisfied by free will by just saying it's random in the universe, right? It doesn't interest us that quantum, particles have randomness in them. We want to know that we human beings are making choices, and no one, to the best that I have found, no philosopher who's convincingly defined what we really mean by free will. You can play this game, by the way, I can't tell you how many areas of philosophy you can play this game. And if you're lucky enough, if you're in a debate and you're lucky enough to have a naive opponent, you can mess them around this. So, if you ever find yourself in a debate around, belief in God, right, and you're on the opposing team. So, you can say, I'm very happy to have this debate with you, but just please do me a favor, just before we start, can you just spend 1 minute? We're debating God. Can you just quickly just define what you mean by God before you start, right? You can play this in someone who's arguing about consciousness. Assuming you're lucky enough to be on the opposing team always, right? Just before we start, can we just define the terms? Do you mind just spending 1 minute just defining the terms? And of course, nothing will ever go any further than that. So all I'm pointing out is that this is part of a family of problems where for reasons that we understand very well, we're not able to say that much, and I think free will is in that category. Let me just try and spend a few moments, in a sense, elaborating on Andrew's point, but just explaining why we're in a mess with this topic. Again, I want to emphasize my personal view is that we are in a mess around this topic, meaning to say I haven't found convincing. And all the stuff that's said around this, to me, seems to be wriggling out of the core issue. The philosophers that I like best, and again, I'm just an amateur. I'm just reading the stuff. I'm not making any claim to any particular insight in this. I'm just sharing my understanding of this. I haven't found any of them very convincing of what they say. Now, my personal view is, yes, we are in a mess around this topic. But if you didn't realize you were in a mess around this, well, yeah, we humans are in a mess around all sorts of things. Like, let's just acknowledge that. So all I want to now do is really say 3 points. The first two are at least 2 reasons why we're in this mess that are far more fundamental than free will, and the third is an appeal against what I think is the foolish and superficial solution to the problem is, well, let's just chuck all these concepts out because we can't define them. Let's pretend they can't exist. So, I mean, again, I mentioned God. You could say, can't define God, so let's chuck him out of the equation. But in a moment, I'm going to say we can't define causality, so let's chuck that out of the equation. We can't define consciousness, so let's chuck that out. We can't define free agency, so let's chuck that out. We can't define alma discussia, so let's chuck that out. Whatever language you want to use of anything meaningful by the way, we can't define meaningful and purpose. And part of what philosophy has taught us is that there are many concepts that, as soon as you begin unpicking, fall apart in many respects. So just to speak about this in the context of free will. So one part of the problem is that there is a part of all of us sitting in this room that is burningly irritated with this question. Because what we want to do is we want to answer this question by saying, it's me that's the cause of this. Why are you ducking the problem? It's me that's the cause of this. Why are you building a philosophical problem here by saying, is the cause, if we can identify the cause, then we've identified the cause, so it's not free will. And if you haven't identified the cause, then you haven't identified the cause, so then it's just random. The answer is I'm choosing, I'm the cause. And I keep on pushing on that and saying, well, what do you mean I'm the cause? You're the cause. But what's causing you to make that decision? If there's nothing causing you to make that decision, then you're acting randomly. And if there is something that's causing you to make that decision, then you're not expressing free will. And the source of this problem is because we don't really know what the word I means. We don't really understand consciousness. We don't have a definition, believe it or not. It's not just God that we don't have a definition of, or free will that we don't have a definition of. We don't really have a definition of what consciousness is. We all know, in fact, the most basic thing we know about ourselves is that we're conscious, we're experiencers, right? And we don't know what it is that is doing the experience. You may say, if you're tempted by neuroscience, it's your brain. But the brain, we know what the brain is. I mean, you can weigh it and measure it, and you can, in theory, define every molecule and every atom in the brain. It's just matter, right? It's just complicated, arranged matter. What in matter is it the quality of being able to experience? That there's a me here, there's an I here that is aware. I'm experiencing things. I'm assuming all of you are. But are you all experiencing things? Yeah. Okay. I say that as a joke, but again, this is the famous philosophical. Yeah. This is the famous philosophical problem. But the famous philosophical problem is that none of you have the ability to prove to me that you're conscious. And this has been discussed in more recent years around Turing test and artificial intelligence and computers. What exactly could something do to prove to us as consciousness? What could you do to prove to me you have consciousness? Nothing. There's no way you can prove to me that you have consciousness. In essence, the only fact I know about the universe, really know Yedia in the language of Das in the language of the Mukabbanim. The only thing that I really know in the most profound and intimate way is the fact that I'm an experiencer. Everything else could be an illusion in theory, right? It could be there's a mad scientist tricking my neurons. I'm just a brain floating in a vat, right? This is Descartes' famous point. The only thing I can really know is that I'm an experiencer. Everything could be an illusion, other than the fact that's in the me here that's experiencing the illusion. So the only thing I know is that there's a me here experiencing the illusion. And yet, we don't begin knowing what that sentence really means. We don't know where consciousness emerges from, how consciousness can experience things, how it interacts with the physical. But by the way, again, I've said before, and I'll say again, one of the things that frightens me about the sort of current spirit of materialism and nihilism and this sort of very earthy view that if you can measure it, a lab exists, and if you can't, it can't, and we're just a piece of biomass, so let's just get on and live and enjoy life and die because there's no meaning and no purpose to existence. All of that is both dangerous because it's decadent and soul destroying and destructive of humanity and meaning and civilization and culture and anything that's possible. It's also rubbish philosophy because the paradox over here is that if you speak to someone who's somewhat fallen for that worldview, and all of us on some level have fallen for that worldview, we all live in this world in which we say, I know about physical cause and effect, right? I've learned Newtonian mechanics, I've learned all sorts of things. I know what it means to say that I can lift up an object and it falls. I know why when I, take this cup and pour it, liquids will pour out. I know if I shove something, why it will move. That we know about. But what we don't know about is the interplay between spirit, the shama, and soul, consciousness, and the immaterial and the physical, right? Nonsense. The only thing we know about is how the mind interacts with things. We don't know anything about physical interactions, if you want to be very, very philosophical and skeptical about these things, because there's nothing that we can know for sure other than the fact of our own consciousness. The most basic thing we know is the fact of our own consciousness. We don't know anything else from the inside. If I say to someone, I can demonstrate to you how minds can affect matter, it sounds like some sort of claim of telepathy or something mystical and spooky. But the truth is, here is mind affecting matter, right? My mind is causing matter to move, right? So my mind has the ability, it sounds like something out of science fiction, my mind has the ability to affect the physical universe. And it's something we experience the whole time. In fact, it's the only thing we ever directly experience. We never directly experience physical things affecting other physical things, because we can only ever experience through the interface of minds. The only thing that we directly experience is minds interfacing with other things. So we have a problem here, which is we don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what it is in physical matter or properties that gives rise to consciousness, or indeed if consciousness emerges from physical things, or it's an interface between the two. We have no proper philosophical answers to any of these questions. I want to explain again, this isn't that we have a scientific question over here. Scientific questions are where you have a very clear range of philosophically sound possibilities, and you just don't know which one. It's if someone suddenly came running into the room, we suddenly heard a knocking at the door, someone came running into the room and said, Zobin, I know you're interested in these things. We've just discovered which chemical it is that gives rise to consciousness. It wouldn't solve any of the problems, because we don't know what those words mean. We don't know. It's not that we happen not to know the answer. We haven't yet dug deep enough into neurons to find the answer. We don't know conceptually what it means to say that physical matter gives rise to consciousness, when consciousness is fundamentally non-physical. It's an experience. We know the fact that we are experiencers, and we don't know how physical matter gives rise to experience, what the relationship between physical matter and experiences is. As far as we understand, this table doesn't experience anything. So how can a complex arrangement of tables, which is all that neurons ultimately are, yes, experience things? And even if it turns out that maybe, as some Eastern philosophies believe, that the table also experiences things, what is it in the physical matter that allows it to be an experiencer? We don't know how to answer those questions. We don't even know where consciousness is found, right? This is part of the mystery of consciousness. Where is consciousness found? Where is the seat of consciousness? It doesn't make sense. Maybe as little kids, people ask, where is the neshama? Where is the soul? Where is the mind? We don't know where it's found. We know it interfaces through the brain. I mean, that we've seen that if you alter the brain, you alter consciousness, right? I'm now taking a consciousness altering drug. I've only got coffee in this cup for those who aren't here. But the truth is, all things that we do are consciousness altering, right? Me holding this cup is consciousness altering. When you eat foods and you get some sugars in the foods and it gives you a bit of energy, that's consciousness altering. So even those who don't have coffee and don't have sugar. So the fundamentally physical experiences are consciousness altering, but we don't know how the physical interplays with consciousness. So the first part of the problem of free will is we don't really understand free will. The answer to the question of free will that we're all intuiting is that there's something called what they call the free agent. There's an agency. There's an answer to my question that lies somewhere between the yes and no, which is I'm the agent of this choice. It doesn't help anything because it just adds another word into the equation. The problem is we don't know what that word means because we don't know what consciousness is. So this is part one of the paradox. You had to share that. Yeah, basis Shalana. I mean, the truth is, one of the claims that rings most difficult to many of our kids' generation, many of the generation that's really grown up with the full force and thrust of this sort of very materialistic philosophy, is the survival of consciousness after death. It's a very weird idea that there's a neshama that survives after death, and it's this very spooky idea that Judaism seems to be calling them to believe. All I'm pointing out here is that there's nothing either particularly tenable or untenable about the belief. There's zero philosophical or scientific argument really either way. It's if anything, actually, it's the more philosophically coherent view, because we don't know what the interplay between consciousness and our material bodies are. We don't have any.
This term so freely.
Yeah.
And we had no, like as you said, you can't define God, you can't define anything else. You've got any idea what it means. The concept that somehow man is constructed in order to say, after death there is another world.
So we spoke. I did give a series on Olam Haba. So I said a little more than that. But in essence, and let's leave terms like Olam Haba out of the way because let's not go into them. But just the claim that consciousness survives in some shape or form, whether we call it neshama or whatever it is, but consciousness survives after death, sounds, if you adopt a materialist philosophy, very strange. The truth is, as soon as one begins thinking about it, there's nothing in the least strange about it at all, because on the contrary, consciousness doesn't seem the sort of thing that could disappear. It doesn't seem to be found in material arrangements of matter that should disappear when material disappears. A Jewish thinker once put it like this, and I'll just sort of shamelessly plagiarize their mashal. They said as follows: the analogy they used was, imagine if all children, all humans were born with goggles over our eyes, and we noticed that as life went on and the goggles got scratched and damaged and so on, our vision deteriorated. So we would have a worldview in which we think that the goggles in pristine health are the generators of eyesight, and as they deteriorate, eyesight deteriorates. And if I made the claim that if we were to remove the goggles completely, vision would be restored, that claim would sound outlandish. But we understand that these are just goggles over the eyes, and therefore removing the goggles would restore eyesight to its pristine form. So it's similarly in the nature of consciousness and its interface through the brain. We don't have any way of knowing. We do observe that as the brain's health deteriorates, consciousness seems to become affected. And the conclusion, therefore, that many come to is that with the removal of the brain completely, in other words, the cessation of brain activity, consciousness ceases. But we have no philosophical or scientific evidence of that fact. We don't have any particular way of identifying either way whether the brain is an interface of consciousness or analogous to the goggles, or whether it's the generator of consciousness, in which case, as the brain disappears, consciousness disappears. We simply don't have at the moment the philosophical clarity to say anything of any sense around this topic. If anything, there's perhaps slight arguments for the latter view, that even with the cessation of the physical, consciousness carries on, because consciousness doesn't seem to be the sort of thing that can disappear. The analogy I've used is in sort of Platonic form terms is like saying if a number disappeared, right? If someone came running into this room, the same fellow who just told us about the chemical that generates consciousness, and said, Rabbi Zobin, disaster is going to strike the world because the number 4 has just disappeared. It's gone extinct. It doesn't seem to be the sort of thing that can go extinct. It's a concept. It's not. You can run out of purple paint. There can be a purple paint crisis in the world, but you can't run out of purpleness. Right? You can run out of you could live in a universe in which there isn't 4 of anything. You can imagine such a universe, right? We're long past the deterioration universe. The universe in which there's not 4 of anything. It happens to be a universe where there's no 4 atoms, no 4 particles, no 4 molecules. There's not 4 of anything. But the concept 4 doesn't seem to be affected by the lack of material. It's not the sort of thing that could be lacked by material. So consciousness at the moment, could perfectly reasonable argument say consciousness is exactly the same thing. It's not the sort of thing that can disappear. So just to summarize, the first problem with, or the first reason why we struggle to define free will is because free will is clearly bound up with agency, with there being a chooser who chooses the free will. Being a chooser seems to be bound up with the concept of consciousness, and his advanced level of consciousness. Even if dogs are experiencers, as far as we understand, they're not experiencers who reflect on the experience of experiencing. In other words, they don't make moral choices in the same way that we do. If they do, good luck to them. I mean, canine philosophy is not something I've ever explored. But I'm saying I'm not committing myself to any. If it turns out animals have a high level of consciousness, then we realize fine. But from a philosophical point of view, as far as we understand, the reason why we have paradoxes around free will is because we don't really understand human agency. This is number one. If we want to put that in Kabbalistic terms, we could make this analogous to our lack of ability to define God, in the same way as God is above time and space and definition because he's infinite, and as the Rambam elaborates in Mo Nevuchim very successfully, if free will is generated by the godliness within us, our own creative power, whatever language you use, whatever philosophical and mystical language you want to use around these matters. But that's another way of saying the same idea, which is if free will is generated from that which is spiritual within us, and that which is godly within us, and God has shared of his existence with us and shared of his creative ability with us, then that's another way of explaining why we have definitional problems over here that mean that we fall apart when we try to define this. So this is the first definitional problem around free will, which is I personally have not heard anyone who says anything particularly convincing in the resolution of this paradox. All I'm pointing out is that the root of the problem is because the answer lies somewhere around the murky concept of agency. That's the intuition we're all feeling, though as you unpick agency, it also falls apart. And agency is bound up with consciousness, which we know is something famously impossible to define. The second problem over here is that even in the physical, even if we cut out all this sort of spooky stuff and consciousness and neshama and chedek and kamimal and godliness and everything else, and we just want to move to the realm of the very, very physical, David Hume, the Scottish philosopher going a couple of hundred years back, already pointed out very successfully, and again, it's not controversial to say that he pointed out something that very profoundly upset the world of philosophy and generated lots of discussion, Whether other philosophers have succeeded in answering his questions or not is controversial. My personal take is that the questions remain better than the answers. He points out that even in mechanical cause and effect, we don't really know what we mean by cause and effect. The most we can ever observe is the sequence of events, but the actual cause that we posit as emerging from that is philosophically we're unable to define, and we have no evidence of, other than it's a sort of a convenient system of working with things. So if you watch that stone flying towards the window, and then we see the window smashing and breaking into numerous shards of glass, all we're ever able to achieve is snapshots in time. So we look at it at t, point in time, t+1, a second later, 2 seconds later, 3 seconds later. You can break it down as much as you want. So it can be microseconds or milliseconds later, but the core problem remains that all we're ever able to see is snapshots of sequence, but we're not able to see the cause itself. We're not able to even explain what we mean by the concept of cause itself. So again, without going further into Hume's arguments, I'm simply pointing out that a very senior philosopher, who some agree with and some don't, but certainly everyone agrees, has raised a very, very powerful point. That simply says to us, we don't actually know what even cause and effect means, even leaving aside free will, even leaving aside anything religious, spooky, or anything like that. All I want to do, just to be in the last minute, is simply say, so what do we do when we have philosophical problems? We carry on philosophizing. So we think about them, they're interesting, but we don't throw out the concepts. If we throw out concepts about which there are philosophical problems, we throw out the most basic things that we know about in life. Now, this isn't an argument for messy thinking. There are all sorts of things which we reject if we can disprove them, or if we can point out that they don't make sense. But if we understand why the concept doesn't make sense, then we shouldn't throw it out. In other words, if we understand that this is caught up in matters, for example, like I just said, our ability as humans to observe in the sense of cause and effects, to really be in the experience itself. If it gets down to things like consciousness, which we understand, there may be essential philosophical reasons why consciousness is inexplicable to the conscious being themselves, because you have to observe yourself from the outside. We're not able to rise above our sense of being an own experiencer. If you're in the realm of things where we understand why they don't make sense, I don't think we need to particularly worry about them. And if one wants to use philosophy to throw out free will, as I said, one would really have to throw out cause and effect and a human agency and consciousness to be ethical about it. There is a paradox over here, which is as follows. The extremists in this area like saying we are extreme skeptics. Let's throw out any philosophical concepts that we don't understand. The Dawkins of the world, who may be very good biologists or evolutionary biologists, but certainly very, very poor philosophers, will say things like that. They actually, people think that they are atheists in the sense that they're critiquing belief in God. They really, and they write this explicitly, to be fair, they're quite honest about this. They critique the whole endeavor of philosophy, because they say, let's just stick to a scientific worldview where what we see is what we have, and everything else, I don't know, like is meaningless. In a sense, it's just speculation. The problem is it's exactly the opposite. The only thing, as Descartes pointed out, that we know is our consciousness. There's a paradox in using the tools of science to reject the very medium or the very essence of being an experiencer. The only thing we know, if I ask you, if you want to be as skeptical as possible, and again, Descartes pointed this out, extreme skepticism doesn't cause you to throw out consciousness or free will. Extreme skepticism causes you to throw out everything else. Everything else might be an illusion. We have no evidence that that everything I'm experiencing is an illusion. I have no evidence that all of you aren't conscious free. I have no way of knowing that you have consciousness, that you're not just robotic. The only thing I know is the fact of my own conscious experience. So if you want to be an extreme skeptic, all you're left with is conscious experience and being a free agent. Everything else, that there's a me here that is aware, my own awareness. Everything else could be an illusion. So it's almost like the Gemara calls it like turning the plate on its head, turning everything up. Because of interesting and profound philosophical and scientific questions, we're going to throw out the most basic thing. How can we use the awareness of cause and effect external to ourselves to throw out the only cause and effect that we ever directly experience, which is that of ourselves being the cause of things. I experience myself being the cause of what? I don't really know that there's a hand here, I don't really know there's a cup here, but I do experience myself being the cause of a consciousness changing, of an ability to operate on my own consciousness. That's the only thing I ever experience. So because of a scientific worldview in the West, gone to an extreme, unfortunately, sometimes due to the profound abilities of science to change the world in a remarkable and wonderful way, gone to an extreme, at sometimes, rejection of thought and philosophy. We're talking about throwing out the only thing I have experienced, which is the fact of me being my own experience of my own consciousness. The only thing I experience, which is that me being a free agent, that it has a causative power, and to throw that out because of external inability to explain. Somebody says, how can there be free will? How can there be consciousness? We're just biomass. The question is the other way around. How do you know you're just biomass? Because you are consciousness experiencing these things. So how can you throw out the second order? How can you throw out the most primary thing based upon a second stage experience? So to summarize, there are, in my opinion, there remain profound problems around three things which intertwine with free will. There are profound philosophical definitional problems of what free will is, which profound problems around what human consciousness is and free agency, profound problems around cause and effect. If one wants to throw into it, profound problems around godliness, which perhaps underlies free will, according to the thinking of the Mekabalim. Okay, and so what? These are things which are at the most fundamental of what we human beings experience. If you wish to be an extreme skeptic and even throw that out, you can do so, but then any possibility of further discourse falls apart. You know, you can be an extreme skeptic and say we can't prove logic, which is a fact, right? We can't prove logic. Logic seems to us axiomatic. I mean, what tools would you use to prove logic? Only the tools of logic, so it becomes a self. So you can throw out logic, but then you cease to speak, because all reasoning and all discourse and even the very thinking about logic is using the tools of logic. So the alternative is curling up in a corner and crying. What I mean to say is that there's nothing, you enter into a world of science, you enter into a world in which nothing meaningful can be said. If one assumes that there's a consciousness here, if I don't doubt the reality of my own consciousness, and I hope none of you doubt the reality of your consciousness, then to me it seems this is the sort of philosophical problem that makes an interesting topic for a Sunday morning philosophy share, but shouldn't unduly challenge us.
So in the courts,
Yes.
they may often say that this poor young fellow who has done X, Y, Z is a cause and effect of whatever it is.
Yes.
And using that it gets out of personal responsibility.
Correct. So someone can stand up in court and make a philosophical claim, which is I don't believe in free will, or a psychological claim, which is I was a victim of my circumstance, my upbringing. The philosophical claim is one that you can make, as I said, but I think we would all reject because it doesn't fit our human experience that free will is impossible. I mentioned, that the Torah would fall apart without free will. The truth is, the whole society, we wouldn't know what meaning means, we wouldn't know what purpose means, we wouldn't know what it means to be a human being. If we're just a machine, then what's it mean just to be a Coke machine? Right? A Coke machine also does chesed, right? It does and you put money in the slot and out. If you have a free coffee machine in your office, the coffee machine is another Almavina, right? Spends his whole life feeding people, giving people to drink, right, with syrup or without syrup. So what does it mean to be a machine? It's so profoundly the opposite of our sense of self. That's what I mean when I'm saying don't throw out the concept because of the philosophical problems. Because it's not just that it raises questions to throw it out. It's that we stop knowing what it means to be me. There's no one here left to speak. That's what I meant when I said just curl up in the corner. There's the sense of me-ness that I have, that the me that's there, that's speaking to you, is so intertwined with the sense of myself not just being a machine. That we don't know what it would mean not to have that. So I'm going to throw out the speaker, the logician themselves, the thinker themselves, because of thinking problems. The very essence of being the thinker, the contemplator, the philosopher is built on a sense of self. So I don't think that your potential criminal could stand up in court and argue philosophically. What they could argue is psychologically, last week's share. They could say, I'm a victim of a very poor upbringing, I wasn't taught morals and so on. And you know what, they may be right. We are currently not in a situation where we can determine degree of human culpability. I already mentioned only the Kel Deus, only Hashem himself can judge human culpability. It may be the case, how do we know? Somebody stands up in court and is up there for a crime, maybe because of that upbringing. This was, to put it in the language of last week's year, maybe this was beyond the bechira. The justification for court systems has to be something around either functioning of society, a fiction that we need to adopt in order to continue, or if, as Marminim in Torah, a carefully shared delegation of responsibility for sorting society out given to human beings. If you look in our tradition, again and again, Elokim Nitzov Vadas Kel, that the idea that to be a judge of another human being is seen as a profoundly sensitive, scary, awesome, and very, very limited ability, only given on rare occasions as the ability to decide about others is delegated to us. We say this in davening every day. We appoint Jewish judges so that you, God, alone rule over us. In other words, the appointments of human judges as a way of restoring only God to rule over us. It's a very, very carefully applied system. This is the philosophical basis of why in halacha, the ability of courts to act is so circumscribed, so limited. We can look at this at length on another occasion, but basically courts have two functions. They have a need to run society on a basic level, which they have, and then they have the pure application of pristine judgments, which is where Rabbi Kiva says, if I was in charge, I would never sentence anyone, right? The court system is so carefully delineated because of the psychological element of what you're saying, which is we humans can't make a judgment ultimately. Of course it's possible that I know it doesn't make us comfortable because there's a part of ourselves that feels there's something sort of loony left and terribly politically woke about the idea that there could be individuals out there who aren't responsible for their decisions. But I think anyone who's seen anything in the world knows this could be the case. There could be people that were brought up in awfully deprived backgrounds, or people suffering from extreme internal challenges to their mental health or well-being, whatever, who reach a state where they're not. Halacha recognizes the idea of a shota, right? The idea of someone who is exempt from mitzvahs and exempt from legal responsibility, a koton, a cheresh. I don't think there's anything sort of woke or far left around this idea. The question then is what you do with it, where you go with it. Is that a way of absolving everyone of all responsibility? So that's the topic of another show, how we handle that question. But the psychological problems, if you will, we dealt with last week. Yes, the kutas of bechira, part of the implication that could be that there can be certain people who do terribly bad things who aren't responsible for it because it's beyond their range of free will. And on a philosophical level, this is one long show which we've left with a profound, we don't know the answer to this question, and we have to learn to live with lots of I don't knows. That's not a cop-out or and so on. It's nothing to do with religion. It's a fact of philosophy that some of the most fundamental parts or sense of self that we have are currently philosophically undefinable. We are responsible for actions, yeah.
Speak for yourself.
I want to tell you, by the way, we've run out of time, but the truth is, this philosophical game sort of we played today applies to everything, right? We don't know the definition of water philosophically. There's very, very profound problems with even the definition of chemicals and the like. Those who are interested can read a bit of Hume around this and other thinkers. But if you turn the searchlight or spotlight of philosophy on anything, unfortunately, it begins evaporating. That's what philosophy. That's what philosophy does. Okay, I wish everyone a good day.
The love of knowledge. Yeah.
It's a love of knowledge, and yeah, as you look at it, it begins evaporating. Yeah.